Okay, we're called to order. I'm sorry, I was introducing people in the hall. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming here tonight. My name is Mike Heine. I'm the Delavan-Darien School District Coordinator for School Community Relations. And tonight we're going to be talking about moving forward with strategic planning in the Delavan-Darien School District. Presenting the information about strategic planning for the district will be our facilitator, Dr. Feddema. A little bit about him first. Dr. Feddema comes to us highly recommended from several sources, including the School District of Beloit and the School District of West Osha Central. For those of you who have not read his biography in our online district news release, here's a little bit more about him. Dr. Feddema has spent more than 2 decades leading strategic planning groups. He's now retired from corporate work, but he was last with Cambridge Strategies, a Texas-based company that helps school districts and educational organizations with strategic planning, future-focused board training, technology training, planning, campus and facilities planning, and much more. For 8 years, Dr. Feddema served as the Director of Planning for Township High School District 214, one of Illinois' largest school systems. Serving over 250,000 residents in suburban Chicago, District 214 is well known for its quality programs and services. As Director of Planning, he was responsible for developing and coordinating the district's strategic planning system. His educational experience also includes being an administrative assistant to the superintendent, an assistant principal, high school teacher, and an athletics coach. He also served as a project director for a regional future studies program for highly gifted students. Most recently, Dr. Feddema led strategic planning effort with the School District of Beloit, which has many shared concerns and challenges of the Delavan-Darien School District. Steve McNeil, the superintendent for Beloit Schools, had this to say about Dr. Feddema. Quote, "The thing I appreciated most with him is he stays on task and he doesn't hurt feelings along the way. He keeps his eye on the ball and really challenges you to do what's best for your district." West Osha Central completed its strategic planning last spring. West Osha's district administrator, Dr. R. Scott Pierce, said this of Dr. Feddema. Quote, "I believe he is one of the strongest planners out there. One of the things I found fascinating about him is, when working with our planning team, he always sees the big picture and helps he put the puzzle together without it becoming his plan. It's the school district's plan." Pierce said he has also worked with Feddema several times in other positions and has always been pleased with his work. As I turn it over to Dr. Feddema, I want to remind anyone interested in participating in updating the district's strategic plan to fill out and turn in a sign-up sheet. They're available in the back after this informational session. They're available on the music stands outside the doors. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Feddema.
Good evening, and thank you for coming out tonight. I'm going to be candid with you. I was hoping I didn't have to do strategic planning anymore. I tried to retire last June 30th, but when he gave me a call and explained the situation here in Delavan-Darien, and he asked me if I'd be willing to come up and work with you on that, the more I heard about the situation, the more I became intrigued with it. Don't want to pull any punches here. There's an awful lot of controversy swirling around the school district. And I think the strategic plan can help pull all facets and all constituents together if people are willing to make it work. So what I'd like to do tonight is explain some of the things that makes a Cambridge framework for strategic planning different than other frameworks for strategic planning. And I think it'll resonate with some of you about some of the issues that you're struggling with as a school district community. And what I'd like to do is just explain the process and discipline that we use for strategic planning. And wherever questions come up, I would invite you to ask those questions. I've been doing this for over 25 years. I've done 194 of these first planning sessions. Worked all over the United States. Worked at several international schools. In fact, the one that I hope was my last one was the American School in Paris last year. Thought that would be a really good one to finish on. And it was a wonderful experience. But it works wherever I work because all of the decisions that are made by the constituents of the local community. We don't believe that anybody can set strategic direction from outside of the local community, be they the federal government or the state government or external consultants. In fact, we don't refer to ourselves as consultants, we refer to ourselves as facilitators. We help facilitate a planning process without ever intruding on the decision making. There are several key parts of our framework for planning that are different from other frameworks for strategic planning. Here's the first one. Ours has a great deal of participation by every key constituent group. We have been asked over the years to plan with just educators and not having the community members involved. And we've declined every time because these schools are called public schools. They're schools of the public. So when we plan strategically, we want school administrators at the table. We want teachers at the table. We want support staff at the table. We want parents, board members, and even community leaders who don't necessarily have students in the schools. We also think it's good practice to have a couple of your students there. They're typically juniors or seniors. They have a wonderful way of understanding that they're the object of the process, and they make great contributions. And it's been my experience over the last 25 without being particularly offensive to the adults. Now, I think that's really important because we want people to be full and active participants in this so that every key stakeholder group is informed. We think it gives us a better plan and it protects us from being blindsided by only having one particular or two particular points of view. And that's one part of our planning framework that is quite different from others in strategic planning. The second one is also important. In fact, I think it's the combination of the two that gives this staying power. How we make decisions. This is a shared decision-making process. It's not just a person or the superintendent working with the board alone who are making decisions. We're inviting people to the table to actually make decisions. There's three ways to make a shared decision. One that's very common and people use it all the time is to consult with others to make sure they have the relevant background information before the people in charge make the decision. We usually call that consultative decision-making, and we're not doing that here. We don't want to just provide feedback or get people's input. We actually want them to participate actively in actually deciding what the future direction of your school district will be. The second way to make a shared decision is to discuss the issues and then decide them democratically. We vote on them. I don't know if you've been paying any attention to the United States in the last 20 years, but voting on issues never actually resolves them. Voting doesn't build a team of people who are working for the common good. It builds factions, and it separates groups of people into winners and losers. And the losers don't think they've really lost forever. They're just trying to regroup so they can win the next vote and inflict their will on other people who are against that position. We have never succumbed to votes. And in fact, the way I earned my living for over 20 years was getting groups of people who I hardly knew to get to agreement on the future that they wanted to have for the students in their community. So that only leaves one other option. We're not just getting input from people and others are going to decide later and we're not going to vote on them. It means we have to get to agreement. The word for that is consensus, but that word is often misdefined. Sometimes people describe a supermajority as a consensus. Oh, the committee had a consensus on that. We voted 16-9 to do something. What that really means is one side got all of their votes and a few votes from the other side so that they had a supermajority. That's not what a consensus is. Consensus is genuine support. That every member involved in that planning process supported the decision that was made. Now, folks, that's a very important concept because consensus is difficult to achieve. In fact, I don't think people really achieve consensus. I think they discover it. I think they discover the positions that they can all support. And one of the dangers in using consensus decision-making is it takes a great deal of time to get to consensus and not merely settle for majority rule. But that's not the biggest danger in consensus. The biggest danger is shooting high and not getting everybody's agreement. So what do we do next? Well, let's lower it a little bit. Let's see if we can get this. And if we can't get this, let's lower it a little more. Let's lower it a little more. So what you finally agree on doesn't really make much of a difference at all. As a facilitator, it's my job to make certain that planning teams don't settle for something that doesn't really matter. That they are actually challenged to find the high common ground. That regardless of their role, as teachers, or administrators, as community members, as support staff members, and community leaders, that we all see positions that we can support. And that is never easy to do. But whenever you do it, it's worth doing. Because then you have people of all different walks of life within a community who are willing to work together to make those ideas happen. You can't get that without the broad base of participation. But because we're looking for agreement, we want all of those participants to be focused primarily on student well-being. That's the third key factor here, folks. We actually have one ground rule for participation when we do this with districts. That everybody who wants to serve on the planning team has to be committed to the long-term health of the whole school district. That they should put student well-being at the forefront of their decision-making. Now look, I'm no Pollyanna. I've been in this for a long time, my whole career basically, once I left my school district. And I know that people are driven by self-interest. And I don't want people to deny their self-interest. If you are a teacher, being a teacher colors how you make a decision. If you're a board member, being a board member colors how you make a decision. If you're a parent, being that parent colors how you make a decision. I do know this, when my daughters were teenagers, every decision was colored because I was the parent of the teenage daughters. But what we want people to do is not make their role or their narrow or special interest be the primary determinant of a decision. The primary decision is what can we do that's in the best long-term interest of the entire school district. I'm absolutely convinced, folks, and I wasn't convinced when I started this. The first one I did was in my own school district. I was just a rank amateur, and I have to tell you, I never let anybody see that plan anymore because there are flaws in it, technical flaws. But it served us pretty well in our school district for many years. And when I first did that, I hoped that was true. That people could rise up beyond the special or the narrow or the personal interest to deal with the general interest. And it worked. It worked then, and it worked again, and again, and again, and so far it's worked 194 times. And I don't believe you'll ever make a bad decision if you put student well-being at the forefront. Believe me, I'm worried about Wisconsin right now, that there are so many fights in Wisconsin over economic issues, that the student well-being will be lost. By the way, that's not just in your district. I'm talking about the bigger issues related to collective bargaining, the governor, and the changes that were made in the last several months. If those were the only issues you were struggling with, that would be a good reason to get everybody together to think strategically about where we're going. But it's not the only issues you have. So full participation, consensus decision-making, and student well-being as the primary determinant of making decisions are three very important facets that make this different from others. The fourth one is it's fully implementable. We actually are contemplating having you'll see in a moment that our planning framework starts with a 3-day planning session that stretches into the evening on the first 2 days. It's 32 to 37 hours. of a planning team constructed with those various stakeholder groups, setting strategic direction for the school system. And then that's followed up by task forces. We call them action teams for every issue that comes out of that. We call it a strategy. And those task forces go through a very well-designed discipline of coming together with specific plans of action. That usually takes 3 to 4 months of dedicated work, and that's presented back to the original planning team. When that planning team accepts it, and the board approves that plan, then you can immediately start implementing those solutions. And I think one of the reasons I'm here tonight is because we wanted to start this in the fall so that we could finish this in the spring and drive productive changes that would be factored into budget decisions for next year's work. A lot of strategic planning doesn't get you to the point where you can actually implement these things. And in fact, over the past 20 plus years, I've worked in a lot of places that had a very bad taste with strategic planning because they haven't actually got to implement that. They developed a plan, lots of people were involved, but then it sat on a shelf. This plan should drive budget development, and it should be actually integrated with the work of the administrative staff, and they should be held accountable for making progress on that every year. We're not just doing it for show when they have a plan, we're doing it to make a difference in your schools over time. And the final thing that's different is this framework for planning has been fully translated for use in public schools. Strategic planning was originally, well, way back when, it was a military concept, but originally it was a for-profit thing. And sometimes people still use a corporate-based approach to strategic planning that does not translate really well for public schools. This one is fully translated for public schools. Every single component is focused on public schools. And it would serve you well as it served other clients that I've worked with well. What I need to do is go out there with that overhead and show you, actually I want to talk a little bit about why strategic planning is necessary, and then show you the planning framework and talk through how we go through that. I actually really want you to ask questions as they occur to you. And in fact, I think I'll open that opportunity right now before I actually make that. If there's any questions you have about these points that I've just made. You see, I don't really want one group in a school district to foist their will on another group against their will. That's why we have that full, broad-based participation coupled with consensus decision-making. I don't even want a majority of people to foist their will against an unwilling, resistant minority. I want to find the high common ground. Does anybody have any questions about that before I talk generally about why it's necessary? I hope I can transfer this without doing something terrible as well. I think one of the first questions that anybody who's new to strategic planning asks is, why do we have to do it in the first place? There's the answer. We live in a period of absolutely unprecedented, multifaceted change on multiple fronts. That's not news. It's been going on for the better part of 30 to 35 years as microcomputerization and communication satellites have been totally integrated into our lives. By the way, you can see from today's headlines examples of that. Some of those protests that are taking place in Occupy Wall Street or Occupy Chicago, etc., are being spread because of those communication devices that are handheld, whether it's Twitter or Facebook, to organize without people being together. Those technologies have made time and space moot on many, many issues. Because of that, there are new ways to do things. But of course, change is always accompanied by what? Resistance to it. In fact, I think some of the things that are the source of controversy in your school district now are a result of changes that were made that came out of your last strategic plan that some people don't appreciate. Let's be honest about that. Change is neither good nor bad, it's different. I'm sorry, it can be good or it can be bad. But if you folks decide that we don't need to change, then someone else will force that change on you. Let me tell you, when we do a strategic plan, we do both an internal and an external analysis. The internal analysis is an examination of the strengths and weaknesses we have within our own school district community. The external analysis is an examination of those forces that are outside of our control, that are having impact on us, on whether or not we can achieve our mission or objectives. I think one of the driving forces of change that have had multiple impacts is healthcare costs. It impacts budgets. It impacts collective bargaining. It impacts the very fabric of national elections now. The financial crisis has impacted budgets for every family, or nearly every family. And certainly, all of the organizations that I work with are suffering from very tough financial conditions. In fact, it's one of the reasons why the 3 years before I retired, which I was hoping would be a little bit less trying on me, I was working more than the 15 years before that. It seemed counterintuitive to me. But I think what happened was school districts who had tremendous budget pressures on them said that we can't help but make sure we're using our money the way we want to use it. There's simply no leeway. So in a kind of a perverse way, when I thought people would be less likely to want to invest in strategic plans, many of them were invested in strategic plans because we had to find an alternative way to use the resources that we had because the financial belt-tightening was so acute. It's like an opportunity they'd rather not have had to make certain we're using resources in the most effective way. Another thing that I want you to think of, and I think it's an issue here, and I think it's an issue in Wisconsin, and I don't think it's an issue in the state I live in, Illinois, and that's competition. The whole world gave itself to the free market competition. And that's true in this state. It's not true in Illinois. If people are not satisfied with the quality of education in this state, in the district they live in, they can choose to go to another district and their money will follow them. Well, when you have that, there's a premium for you to make sure you have the best school system you can, to retain the students that were living in your school district, but maybe even attract those that might want to come here. Now, that's not something you chose to do. But to ignore it now would put you in peril. And I also want you to think about that third C up there, complexity. Public education is a very complex enterprise right now. If you make a change in one part of your system, it stimulates changes in other parts of your system. And as I said, changes in your financial condition and changes in healthcare put pressure on the school system to operate effectively. Those 3 C's make it necessary every now and again for people to sit down, people who care deeply about their public schools, and ask themselves strategic questions. Why do we exist? What do we want to accomplish? How do we have to attend to these changes that are swirling all around us? And really there's no escape from those changes, because they're fundamentally happening in virtually all organizations. And to ignore them is to run a risk. I want to use a metaphor that we've used on it. I want you to think about where you think you are right now on this metaphor. we use we call the life cycle. And I want you to start out by thinking about this in biological terms. All living things go through the same life cycle. I'm sorry, all living things go through a life cycle, but their cycles aren't the same. We all start out at the same place. That little green zero there represents birth, the origins of life for every living thing. After birth comes a brief, relatively short-term growth spurt until we reach the peak of our physical growth and development. I'm going to label 10 here when we reach that peak. What 10 represents in terms of biological life cycle is the best we're ever going to be in terms of our growth and development. What happens after 10, folks, in terms of biology? Some of us know. I know. The reason I wanted to retire to northern Wisconsin, folks. 60 years in Illinois was enough. I want to get to northern Wisconsin. Well, as humans, we're actually fairly lucky. We can stay near the top for a while. Eat right, stay fit. We're near the top. Over time, however, the evidence starts to mount. By the time you get to my age, you start to realize you're heading right back to where? Zero. It's immutable. All living things go through that life cycle. Death is as much a part of the life cycle as is birth, biologically. What I'd like you to do now is think in terms of organizational growth and development rather than biological growth and development. All organizations go through these life cycles, but there's a difference. Have you always been Delavan-Darien with the hyphen, or at one time were they separate districts? Separate? Well, that would be when zero started for this district, when they were put together. And organizations go through growth spurts as well. But when they approach 10, we say they're about to enter a crisis. Now be careful how you define this word, because we might define it differently than you. We define a crisis this way. It's a period in an organization's life where it's either going to start getting a lot better, or it's going to start getting worse. And sometimes a lot worse. Now I want you to know something. I'm not doing this for you because of the issues that have been swirling around for the last several months here. I always do this when people are contemplating working with me to develop a strategic plan. Organizations start getting a lot worse if they don't recognize 10 for what it is. And here's what it is. It's the best we're ever going to be the way we're currently doing our business. The way we currently operate, we can't get any better. We can't get any better unless we're willing to what? Change. But there's no agreement in how we should change. Different groups, different individuals want us to change for different ways. So if an organization is unwilling to change, here's what happens. Next year, they could be right there. Next year there, another year there, another year there, another year there. They can't get up here unless they're willing to change, but they could get a lot worse. By the way, I kind of feel your pain with the Brewers. I really was rooting for them to get to the World Series. Remember, I'm a Wisconsin wannabe. And I'm a Cub fan, and we'll never win. But I heard somebody say when they walked in here, there goes Prince. Somebody said that because he's a free agent. And he's a very important player on your team. If you think about championship teams, they sometimes try to hold on and hold on and hold on. But if they hold on too long, all those other teams are trying to replace them as champions. And then they start to get down here. Now, why do people hang on, even in the face of evidence that things are not as good as they need to be, or even as they should be? There's a bunch of reasons. One, it's harder to change than it is to maintain. Second, some people are served well by the current system and are worried if we try to make changes, we won't be served as well. Third, finances unchanging means we might have to use things in another way, the way we're currently using them. But over time, you could be slipping down here. And every now and then, people will realize, you know, we're not as good as we used to be. An organization starts getting a lot better if they do this. They think about 10 and where they are, and if we work together, that's what we'll ask you to do. We'll ask you to understand where are we currently as an organization. How do we currently operate? What are we trying to achieve? And then rather than taking that 10 as an ending point, they will turn it into a starting point. And what we'll ask those people on that planning team to do is identify a new 10. We call that your mission. We define it as the loftiest aspiration you have for your school district. And then what we'll do is we'll put a plan together on how to take this school system from wherever it is at that crisis point. And what do we have to change to get it to 10? And we'll want verbatim agreement for every member on the planning team on what that mission is, what the objectives are for student learning, and what are the strategies for changing our school system. And if we can't get verbatim agreement, then it'll be the first time I've ever done it. The last one I ever did would be the only one I failed at. And I'm really not anxious to have that happen. So I don't want you to answer this question now, but I want everybody in the audience to think about this question. Where are you right now in terms of that green growth curve? Where are you as a school district? Are you right here at the crisis point? Where it's actually a decision that 2 or 3 years from now we're either going to be a lot better or we're going to be a lot worse? Are you actually here? Getting better every day, and people are working hard, and they're really tired, but they feel like, you know, next week is going to be better than this week. If that's the case, you're probably not ready for a strategic plan. You need to keep working the existing one. Are you there? Past the peak. I'm willing to work together. Fraught with controversy. We really don't know how to get ourselves working together again. Because if you're not working together, nothing good will happen for kids. Don't answer it, but I do want you to think about it. Now, the framework that we use for strategic planning is the following. I've been working on this for over 25 years with school districts all across the country. By the way, some of them are like you, small towns, relatively small school districts. I think the smallest one I ever worked with was in a Wisconsin district, by the way, Arborvita School District up in northern Wisconsin. Very small school district, but really a very interesting school district, just an elementary district. I worked with very large school districts too. When they do a strategic plan, they have to follow that up with complementary site plans. I worked in suburban areas, urban areas. I've worked in rural areas. Regardless of where we work, this framework works well for them because every decision that's made is made by the local constituents. I want to talk a little bit about this framework. The large numbers on here, 1 through 12, is the process that we use for developing a strategic plan. The small numbers, 1 through 10, and 9 of them are embedded in this first planning session, and the 10th one's up here, developing action plans, represent the components or the pieces of a strategic plan itself. Now, if I had more time than we actually have tonight, I'd probably spend quite a bit of time helping you understand the components of the plan first and then going back to the process. But I think I'm not going to do that. I think I'm going to talk about the process for developing this and then just highlight a couple of the pieces of the strategic plan. And then I think this will work well for you, but it's always hard work if everybody involved in your school district is willing to work together to make it work. But if we're not willing to work together, it's a waste of your time. And mine too. And I've got a good alternative for my time. Fishing in Vilas County, Wisconsin. Well, I probably won't do too much of that in the next few months. Look at the first step. It's in blue because we never used to have it. And this is my worry here. My worry is not about having the capability of doing it. It's whether or not people are ready and committed to do it. We added this because sometimes, 15 to 20 years ago, we would have superintendents who would try to do this without full understanding and support by their board. They'd try to sneak a strategic plan by their governing board because they didn't think their board would actually endorse it. That was a bad move, and it got superintendents in trouble sometimes, because when you go in and get engaged in this, there's no way to sneak it by a board. And then also, sometimes members of a board, a corporate board, were interested in doing this, but they had a superintendent who wasn't too interested in doing it. Just wanted to hang on until they retired. And that's not good either. So I have to tell you, we put this in here about 12 or 15 years ago as a readiness activity, because it's really before planning. We really want people to understand the power of this framework, the fact that everybody's going to be involved, and that when you reach agreement through consensus, there's some pretty good commitment that people want to follow through on. We count on that. The last thing we want you to do is develop a strategic plan and put it on a shelf. By the way, that's probably the biggest criticism about strategic planning that anybody's ever heard. You did it, and then it sat on the shelf. I guess you could consider this a basic awareness session for those of you who are not familiar with this. But what I really want you to think about is this assertion. This works very well when, regardless of the role of the person who's involved, they are willing to put student well-being at the forefront of their thinking and will make decisions in the best long-term interest of the whole school district. If all of you will do that, this will be a good experience. It'll be meaningful, and it'll give you the possibility to work yourself out of always spending a lot of your time on controversing what we disagree on, because you can now focus on some of the key pieces about your future that you do agree on. Your mission, your objectives, and your strategies for change. I don't want to go any further into that. That is my big concern about working here. If you decide to do it, step 2 is important. You've got to prepare before you actually have this first planning session. That requires 2 pieces. First of all, communicate to everybody in the school district what you're doing, why you're doing it, who's going to be involved, so that there are no surprises. And second, you have to put together vital signs data which describe the state of the school district as it currently exists. That's financial data, that's demographic data, that's performance data, including the initiatives that you're currently working on. And I think it would be nice to have an objective summary of some of the concerns that have surfaced in the last few months as part of that background information. That's given to people in advance. It's public record. Anybody can read it that wants it. But we think that if people who are not working in the school district on a day-to-day basis are going to be involved in setting the future direction, they at least need to know where we are. By the way, that takes some work ahead of time. The third step here may be the most crucial step that you do. You have to put together a strategic planning team which represents a microcosm of your school district. Microcosm means miniature world. It needs to have all those different groups, including people who often disagree. The superintendent puts a planning team together only with her supporters. The whole thing's dead on arrival. It's dead on arrival. By the way, I already told Wendy that. I said, if there are people who really don't agree with you, you still want them to be people of goodwill or are willing to put student well-being first, but then you put them on the planning team. So it represents the socioeconomic diversity of your district, it represents the diversity of roles, it includes teachers, it includes families, it includes administrators, two board members. And by the way, if you have disagreements among your board, you should put one on either side of that too. So that when people look at that planning team, they can say, whoa, that's kind of like our school district in miniature. Now that planning team works 5 days, and they're extraordinary days. They work on this first planning session, which is a 3-day event, and they work at this second planning session, which is a 2-day event. And they work together to draft the first 9 components of the strategic plan. And then they come back and they evaluate the action plans that are done by other groups between those 2 sessions. I don't have any dates on my calendar yet, but what we've talked about is hoping that we could have this session in November-ish. By the way, my calendar is pretty much open now. Never used to be, but it is now. And this second session you want to have sometime in the spring. And the reason you want to have it in the spring is that that second session is you start to identify the ideas that you want to begin implementing as soon as you can and drive next year's budget and drive next year's change agenda. So, I think you can build credibility by putting together a planning team that represents the diversity of opinion and the diversity of roles that are in your school district. And then what you do at this session, which is 3 days, long days, is you draft future direction for every component of the strategic plan except the action plans. Now, what I really don't want to do is go through all of these unless there are specific questions about those. But I want to speak a little bit about those, and I want to show you why I think the beliefs in this setting is really important. You know, you have a strategic plan. It's probably on your website, right? It's got beliefs in it, it's got a mission, it's got objectives, you've got strategies. You have action plans you've been working on for 3 or 4 years. In fact, I think maybe some of the controversy that surfaced in the last few months is because some of the changes that were embedded in that strategic plan. By the way, that's not particularly a surprise to me. Sometimes that happens. But I think because of the controversy, and because of the financial situation, and because of the status of collective bargaining in the state and the changes that are currently in force, it would be time to do another one. It would be time to do another one. And we start with that shaded one called beliefs. The beliefs are meant to be the identification of the shared values of our entire community. I'm going to tell you, a lot of strategic planning frameworks don't start with beliefs at all. They don't start with values. They start with mission or vision. We have always started with values because values differ from place to place. All human beings have them, but they don't have the same ones. It's a unique human endowment to value something and to make value judgments. This one I do want you to think about, but I hope somebody will answer this question. Why do we have values? What purpose do they serve us? I think that's right. Could you say it a little louder? Exactly right. Guidelines for living your life. In fact, I think the process actually works this way. if we value something, then it helps us decide whether we should do something or not. And if we act in a manner consistent with our values, how do we feel? If we act in a manner consistent with our values, how do we feel? Good. And if we act in a manner contrary to our values, how do we feel? Anxious, that's a politically correct way to say it. Traditional way of saying guilty, ashamed. Modern way that's often said in California, I'm experiencing dissonance in my life. Seldom shows up in the Midwest. That's exactly what they're supposed to do. They are the source of our conscience. They help us determine right and wrong for ourselves. If you want to find a well-adjusted, happy person, find somebody whose actions are almost always consistent with not the values they necessarily espouse, but values that they actually hold. I have to tell you, when I heard some of the background about what was going on in your school district, and I read the beliefs in your strategic plan, I'm wondering if people actually believe those things. And if their actions are consistent with those. And I can't possibly know that from the outside. I'm just looking at documents. What I think is really important is go through this process again with a well-constructed planning team and have them identify what values we share. Now let me show you something. So I promise this is the last time I'll draw. You know, left-handed drawing on an overhead is not really good, but this is the last time. But I want you to think about what we're trying to do. And by the way, of everything we do in the strategic plan, this will take you more time than the mission, the internal-external analysis, the objectives and strategies. But it provides the ethical foundation upon which you build the future of your school district. First, the definition of a belief. Formal expression of the organization's fundamental values. That's an error. Organizations do not have values. People do. But what we are going to try to do is identify those values that are so widespread throughout your community and your school district that we could say they're shared. And they also have to be held with firm commitment. Notice the word. Deep and abiding convictions. Non-negotiable ethical principles. Moral imperatives. Those are strong words, folks. We want these to be really important values. The kinds of things that you would reinforce for your children if their behavior was contrary to them. You would say, hold it, we don't do that in this family. It's not consistent with our what? Our beliefs, our values. That's what we're trying to discover first. And the way we go about that, folks, is through a structured process where we ask each individual what their values are, have them discuss with others, and cull away all those that are not shared. And this illustration will help you identify that, how we do that. By the way, it's not a lot of fun to do it, but it's very meaningful. I want you to think of this as a value profile of any community, but it also will apply to your community. And I want you to think for a moment that this person represents a person in the Darien-Delavan community. Everything inside that blue ellipse is what they value. Things outside that blue ellipse, they don't value. A lot of that outside, they're neutral on. A lot of it. But some of it out there, they're not neutral at all. They're very much against. And they would not be amused if the public schools were foisting those values on their children against their will. Get that? Now here's another person who also happens to live in the Darien-Delavan School District. Is it Darien first or Delavan? Delavan-Darien. Sorry. That purple ellipse represents what they value. And again, outside, they don't value that. A lot they're neutral on. Come see, come saw. But a lot, some out there, they're very much against. And then I want you to think of this green ellipse as another person who's in the Delavan-Darien School District. And then I'll do one more, and then I think we can stop. That red ellipse, the same thing. Would we ever put that belief, that one that's starred, for that that person represented by the green ellipse, would we ever put that in the strategic plan for the public school district? Sir, I see you're nonverbal and it's right. Tell us why not.
Because it doesn't have a green with the rest.
Right. And it might be offensive to someone else who's represented by a different color. Would you still believe that if that person in green, represented by green, was elected to the school board with the greatest number of votes ever?
Rephrase the question.
Would you still say no, it's not appropriate, even if that person got more votes than anybody? And he's right again. Because even being elected to the school board does not give you the right to what? Foist your beliefs on other people's children against their will. By the way, if you try to do that, it's a good way to get unelected to the school board at the next election. So what beliefs do we put in the strategic plan? Anybody want to answer that? Yes, back there.
Right in the middle.
Yeah, where all that black stuff is on the overhead. Exactly right. There it is. There it is. If you can discover that and reinforce those values in your schools, you're every family's friend and ally. Do you understand that? Every family's friend and ally. Do you ever get in arguments over values in your public schools, folks? Sure you do. Most of them do. And most school districts have never taken the time to actually identify those values. And if they have in a strategic plan, they haven't posted them and reinforced them. Once you identify those in there, how many staff members do you think should be modeling those while they're at work? All of them. How often? All the time while they're at work. You can't force them to do that when they're not at work, but all the time while they're at work. In fact, if you can discover that, and I never know how many there are. I actually think you'd probably be better served to have 6 or 8 of those rather than 12 and 14 of those. But those are the ones that provide the ethical foundation upon which to build the future of the school. That's what we start with that group of 30 people, that planning team, and they all have to support every one of those beliefs verbatim. And that usually takes from 8 in the morning until about dinner time, 6 at night, to get that agreement the first time. You actually have some in your strategic plan. I won't ask any of you to recite them. But it might be worth taking a look at them and ask yourself, do I believe all these? Does everybody here reinforce these throughout the school system? And by the way, it'd be a very interesting thing for me, doing this for 195th time, to once we finish, to see how close they are to the original one. My guess is they'd be fairly close. Now that's where you start, and then you go to mission. The mission is the loftiest aspiration we have as a school district. It actually has 2 parts to it, your purpose and your function. I think the mission is really important because we say everything else that follows this is referenced back to that mission. So when we do strengths and weaknesses, and by the way, I think that's very important for you folks to do, to identify the strengths and the weaknesses that you perceive in your school district. That's the internal analysis. There are only strengths if they're helping you get closer to the mission, and there are only weaknesses if they're getting in the way. We tally them up and use them. Then we do the external analysis. We take a look at what's happening politically in your state, economically in your state and the nation. We take a look at demographically what's happening, Socially, what's going on in the social lives of kids? Technologically, and what's going on in the profession itself? What we actually do in that external analysis, identify trends and impacts on the school system. And we actually will use the internal and external analysis and the competition analysis, which is part of the external analysis because you don't control your competition. And we'll identify a set of critical issues for your school system at this time. By the way, the strengths and weaknesses discussion is going to be emotional here. It would have to be considering the controversy that's gone on for the last several months. But it's really important for people to identify what is getting in the way, what do we do well that can help us achieve whatever mission we've designed here. And then the critical issues is where you cull away all the unimportant stuff and identify the really big, important stuff. The critical issues have to happen by the end of that second long day. By the way, I don't think I told you this, but we worked from 8 in the morning to 10 at night on the first day, 8 in the morning to 10 at night on the second day, and usually we're finished by about 4-ish on the third day. If it doesn't quite take that long in the first 2 days, fine, but I wouldn't hold your breath on that one here. Where there's controversy and disagreements, it tends to take a little longer. And then at that third day, you translate those critical issues into the strategic objectives, which identify what about student learning, student performance you want to achieve that provides the evidence to get closer to the mission. And then the final thing that you do is identify what strategies do we have to employ, multiple year change initiatives, to try and achieve those objectives and address your critical issues. Most people finish that very tired, but feeling pretty positive about what they did. In fact, just about every place I work, people feel very positive about it. In fact, there's a bond there. And sometimes people who didn't agree on many issues when they came in come out saying, well, at least we can agree on what our beliefs are, our mission, our objectives, and our strategies. If we did that sometime in November, what you would want to do is communicate that draft plan, because that's all it is, because you want to share that with everyone else in the community and all your staff. And then when you communicate that draft plan, you are also asking people to serve on one of the strategies. Strategies are commitments to act. They're stated as a general statement. And then what we do is we put together a group of people, we call it an action team. Some people call it a task force. They do. We call it an action team because they design action plans. What they do in terms of those action plans is develop the specific, more narrowly focused bodies of work that they think have to be done, actually do them. They're do plans. They're what we want to do to make each strategy come alive over time. Every action plan should be small enough to be done within a year or less, because we want to link it to the budget, we want to link it to people and hold them accountable for it. They are also the sorts of evaluating progress on your plan. Did we do it? How did it turn out? And every year as you build budgets, you want the board to expect the superintendent to put forward which action plans and our strategies we're going to fund that coming year. And it should be linked to your budget development process. And you want to hold your superintendent and administrators accountable for moving forward on it. Those action plans typically are designed over 3.5 to 4 months. So I think if we had a November planning session here, I would try to initiate that before your winter break. Have your first meeting of that. And then through January, February, and March, working for a second planning session, April-ish. After that second session, those action plans are either accepted or not accepted for cause. Every one of them has to have sufficient benefits to justify its cost. And every one of them has to be directly related to the strategy. Again, we need consensus by every member of an action team first to get it before the planning team, then from the planning team, and then ultimately we have to have approval from the board. And that saying yes 3 times is deliberate to make sure you don't have any cockamamie ideas that aren't really essential. So you've got to get that kind of agreement before it ever gets implemented. Once that session's over, the administration would prepare a resource allocation plan to submit to the board, and the board would be asked to approve your strategic plan. That's also authorization to implement it. And I think we're shooting for that to be driven for, gosh, what would be the 2012-13 budget? Is that the next one? 2012-13 budget. And that's when also authorizing implementation. Folks, I wanted you to look at the bottom piece here. It says regular reviews. I really want the superintendent to be every month reporting to the board what's going on in the action plans we're implementing this year. I said every month. I meant every 3 months. I meant every quarter of a year, quarterly report. By the way, I think Mike should be sharing that with the community, with the action teams, with the planning team. Let everybody know we're following through on what we designed this year. This is hard work. Under the best of circumstances, folks, this is hard work. And let people know that the hard work is actually being worked on, that we're following through on our plan. But I also want you to think about this last thing that says periodic update. We really recommend every other year, not every year, but every other year, you invite people back together to go through a streamlined version of this process. Why? Because change is rapid. Things happen that nobody anticipated. I'm going to give you 3 examples, folks. One of them is very real for you. At last holiday season, I don't think anybody could envision, 1, what the tsunami would do to everybody rethinking the place of nuclear power. 2, nobody anticipated the Arab Spring. And 3, nobody anticipated the reaction to what happened in Wisconsin to collective bargaining, which was replicated in Ohio and in other states around. Nobody envisioned that. And all 3 of those things were major change initiatives which are having huge impacts on people. So that's why we think you have to periodically have an update of your plan. Because things keep changing. And also it's a way to evaluate your progress and make any changes or new ideas that pop into the plan. Folks, that's a relatively short version of this. It didn't seem short to you, but it was. And what I'd like to do now is just hold it and see if there are questions that you want to ask of me. And any question you want to ask. I mean, I can explain why we do things the way we do. I don't know if that'll be a satisfying answer for you, but I will honestly tell you why we do things the way we do. Yes?
What does consensus look like? And what is our neighbor that everybody at least agrees upon can go out?
Yeah, well, one moment. I'll show you an action team form. We actually write it down. This is how we define action plans. They describe what we actually need to do to implement a strategy. There are specific, shorter-term objectives and activities. I like to refer to them as separately assignable projects. And they have to be relevant to the given strategy. They have to have more benefits towards achieving your mission and objectives than they have costs. Otherwise, it's just not cost-effective. And of course, the sanity test might be a little cute, but what that really means is doable here. That it's not going to drive us insane. This is what an action plan actually looks like. Suppose you had, I know one of your current strategies is trying to develop community partnerships. Suppose we did have a strategy here about we'll develop community partnerships to help all facets of our community, help us achieve our mission and objectives. Well, the specific result might be about a specific partnership. The one that I remembered most recently was to partner with some area universities for professional development. That's what that would be. Every member of the action team has to agree that that's work worthwhile. And then the steps here are a series of steps that the action team believes we should go through in order to achieve that specific objective, that specific result. We actually ask an action team to reach agreement on that and the steps. Then it goes to the planning team. The planning team can do some prudent editing on that, but they would also have to agree on this. And we only ask the board to approve through this specific result, not the steps. Because the steps might have to change when you go to input. So that's what we mean by agreement. By the way, one of the things about consensus that I've seen happen is when people think we can't vote on this, we can't outvote people 18-2, we've got to get everybody's support, it forces them to collaborate and work together. So that's specifically what it means. All right? Now the reason we ask boards not to approve beyond this through the steps is it slows implementation down. Because in many states, boards, if they approve something, need 2 meetings to unapprove something and change it. So we would ask you to approve through that and then give a little latitude for your staff as they go to implement on the steps. So that's what it means. And by the way, I might as well show you this one too. This is what I mean by a cost-benefit analysis, folks. I think too often we accept things in education that are not really well thought out, or we've given a lot of thought to this. So we're talking about both tangible and intangible costs. That's quantifiable and qualitative. But we're talking about tangible and intangible benefits. And the action team has to agree that where there are more benefits to these costs, then it also has to be agreed to by that 30-member planning team before it ever gets to the board. And we think that's protection against doing things that aren't well thought out. And also it's financial protection from overspending. No school district in America has money to spend frivolously. None. They're not there. And if economic growth doesn't start soon, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 years. But nobody has money to spend. Other questions? Yes?
We have a strategic plan that was adopted by the school board less than 2 years ago. Basically, we have the same administration, the same school board. As a person who's concerned about the length of time we're talking about, we really need to start all over again from scratch.
I asked that same question, but I didn't think it was 2 years ago. I thought it was done in 2008, and that...
It was approved in December 2009. December 13th, I think it is 2009. And it just seems like to start at 3 days and then wait until April to really begin to pull all this together, that as a company we seem to be a little more anxious to get going on this.
I asked the same question. I really did. I said, why not work the current plan? At one time we talked about why not just do a site plan at the high school. I asked that when people talked to me about it. But it was 2009, that means 9-10, you were doing some implementation, right?
Oh, no.
Well, okay. 2010 and 11. 2010 and 11 would have been the second year. And now we're into 2011 and 12. So it would have been 3 years. So if you're going to update it during the 2011 year, if you have initiatives in that existing plan, I would think, since we're in October now, that you have some people who are working on some of the initiatives from that plan. Are we? Do we have people working on some of the action plans and the strategies from that plan? Superintendent says, yes, we are. Who? Well,
There's an elephant in the room, sir. Our community has lost faith and trust in
I understand that.
the word of our administration. And while we want our schools to be great, we also want the leadership to be great, and we want the answers to be substantiated. That's all we're asking.
Okay.
We try to ask questions, and what we've gotten instead is stonewall. And that's a huge elephant that's blocking this process right now.
well, I think that's the reason why the decision was made to come and do it again. Because I don't think everybody has internalized that strategic plan. I'm not sure everybody actually knows what's in that strategic plan. And when I was reviewing it just from the documents that were sent to me, I'm even wondering if some of those beliefs are actually shared by the entire community.
I was on the planning committee 3 years ago, 4 years ago. I was very disappointed. It seemed to me, as a person who's very interested, to have been dropped, literally dropped. It was approved by the board and we never revisited. That we didn't find in the minutes.
Look, I think
It's very difficult to jump on board. As much as I know, I did do this in more than one place, in more than one situation, and I know that the plan you have laid out works. I know that. My problem is we're coming at it, and I'm not alone, I really don't think, but we're coming
no position actually to determine whether that is or is not true, if there's another side to that. But I can answer the question that was originally asked, why not keep working the current plan, why to do another one? And that was the reason why. We don't seem to be pulling together. But I do know that there was recently a board vote to support the administration and extend their contracts. Those are factual things, correct? They have extended their contracts, and there was a board vote to do that. So although some members of the community might be upset with this, that doesn't necessarily mean all members of the community are upset with that. And I would encourage, by the way, I always encourage people to be open and to report your progress and to follow through. I always do, especially if you've involved them in designing it. Otherwise, you get cynicism rather than support. But as far as I know, the honest answer to the question that was asked, why not keep working the plan, was because we're not working together now. By the way, there's issues that some of the staff doesn't support the administration. But I also know that some of the reasons that staff may be upset is because they're trying to make some changes that are in that plan in terms of trying to improve achievement. So that's the best I can do. I'm an outsider here. I'm not really looking for work, but I'm willing to do this and make sure you do it well if, and probably only if, everybody's willing to come together again one more time and focus on what's best for the kids here. You know, because ultimately, folks, ultimately, it'll be the students that suffer if we can't get all of the adults working together. I mean, and I asked Wendy and some other administrators here, what's the alternative to this? If you got a better alternative, I'll fish. I don't know what the alternative is. And by the way, I want to say so. I don't want this to be a total downer, folks. I've been in much tougher situations. I'm sorry. I've been asked to facilitate strategic plans in places that were much more polarized and in much more serious issues than in this school district. Although I think these are serious. I think these are serious. I really do. So that's the best answer I've got. Because originally we were talking about, well, let's just work at the high school. But my question was, well, do people really understand? If you do a school site plan, folks, you have to align it to the district's mission and the district's objectives and the district's beliefs. And I think what the question was is we're not sure enough people really understand what's in there and what's going on, so, and the controversy. So that's why I think they're suggesting to do it again. Yes?
If I can make a sidebar comment, please. Not put eyes in front of your head so you move forward, not behind. I welcome the opportunity, I'm sure we all welcome the opportunity, for a third-party administrator to orchestrate and make sure that checks and balances are put in place that we can all get on the same page. It is going to take time, it is going to take work. I believe you've got a house full of commitment and then some, and we will work to get this done. We're not going to look in the rearview mirror. I mean, a lot of people tend to do that. I think we should choose not to do that. Let's move forward. Let's put a plan together. Let's meet with the subcommittees. Let's have checks and balances on a regular basis by a third-party administrator to make sure that everything is being taken care of properly and followed through properly. And by regular meetings, I think we'll be able to accomplish that objective. I'm optimistic. Thank you.
Any other questions? By the way, I'm better at questions than some of the things I questioned about this framework. Yeah.
I'm going to come from a different angle. I read the article in the Enterprise, and it introduced you. I was a little bit late coming tonight. My question to you is, have you been hired on a contract basis from our school district? And have you submitted what the cost for this school district is going to be for your services?
I have not been hired. I am not charging anybody for tonight, and I haven't submitted anything yet, but we have talked about if I was involved, what I charge.
Follow up quickly. We would like a detailed biographical sketch of you, what you have done in the past, submitted to our school district so it can be disseminated in the paper who you are and what we're paying for.
Not a problem for me. And by the way, I would assume that, by the way, what we talked about is that, and I'm not going to say the figures now, but I understand that's all public record, and you can see all of that when that's done. But it's less than 1/3 of what I've charged for the lowest paying client that I've had in the last 10 years. And in fact, I was asked, why are you willing to do that? And I said, I don't know. But actually, I've had time to think about that, sir. And I think I do know. Wisconsin's going to be my adopted state. I was in this state 5 times in February. The first time the day after the Super Bowl. I came in this state and saw just unmitigated joy on everybody I was working with. And the next week I was in right after the brouhaha about collective bargaining blew up. And 4 more times in there. I've devoted my life to trying to improve schools for the benefit of children. And what I'm afraid is going to happen in my adoptive state is that so many adults are going to be so polarized and anger about money that the kids are going to be forgotten. And if I've had a chance to think about why I'm willing to do it at less than 1/3 of what we charge anyone else, that's the best reason I have. And believe me, you won't get 1/3 of an effort from me either. You'll get my best effort. And if this was a typical school district that was dealing with typical pressures, my answer would have been no, I have retired. Would you like any other information about me, sir, before we started to go with this project?
You haven't started, you haven't signed a contract. What do you mean before you start the project?
Any other information? I don't want to do 2 document searches before I submit these things.
Well, I told you what,
Okay.
what I wanted. I wanted you to submit to the school district where you're from, what you've done, your education, your salaries that you claim 1/3. How do I know it's 1/3? You're going to be charged for us 3 times as much. All I know is our property taxes are high in the city of Delvan, and our scores,
Sir,
in the 50 school districts in southeastern Wisconsin, we're down near the bottom. That's what I do know.
sounds to me like you need to do something about it.
Damn right.
Yes.
Part of that planning process, and it is just clearly what exactly is the selection process and how we choose those.
Well, those are great questions. First of all, it's 30 for this planning team, but then it's quite a bit more for the action team. The reason 30 is because the ideal size is 25. But almost nobody can do that because of all the different kinds of roles that we have to have. The reason it's 30 is because of how much time it takes to get to agreement with the number of people there. If you put together a planning team of 50, which some of my clients would like to do, I respectfully decline because you cannot get to agreement with 50 people in 3 days, even working into the evening on those first 2 days. The reason you can't get to agreement is because you have to organize that planning team into small groups. And the small group size should be 5 or 6. Otherwise, it's not a very good small group if it's 7 or 8. Every small group you add adds time because they have to report out. So it's a carefully crafted team of 30, which should represent a microcosm of your school district. So it should have some of the people who are most angry here and feel that as long as they're people of goodwill, willing to work for the benefit of the long-term health of the school district, as well as some of the people who are supportive of what's going on. Now, the second question, who puts it together? Well, that's a prerogative of the superintendent. But some places where there's some skepticism about the superintendent, they'll put together a small group of people, little steering committee, sometimes a board member, sometimes a member from the administration, sometimes a parent community member, who will help craft that planning team so that it has support and credibility in the eyes of the people in the community. That's how it's done. Oh, one other part to your question. These action teams, usually they're about 15 to 20 people. They can be larger, and we never tell people they can't serve on an action team. But it is a bigger challenge if you have a group of 30 than if you had a group of 15. There is one of those for every strategy. I believe the last time you did the strategic plan, the current plan has 5 strategies in it. So that 15 to 20 would be another 100 to 125 people. Sometimes there's 6 strategies, sometimes there's 7. You've got to be careful about having too many strategies, folks, because that will overextend you too. But those don't have to have a preset number. I've had them as large as 40 or 50, but I wouldn't necessarily want to be the action team leader with a group of 40 or 50 on the action planning, but they can be larger than the 30. In your circumstances, I would recommend you do not deny anybody a chance to serve on the action team who's willing to serve. By the way, I should have mentioned this too, and I didn't because of the time. Whereas this is a concentrated 3 days, long hours, action teams typically meet 2 hours a week over 3.5 to 4 months. So it's 2 to 2.5 hours each week over 3 or 4 months. So they work in a different style as well. Any other questions that you have?
You said concentrated, is that 3 days in a row?
Yes. Yeah. I'll tell you a little reason why. One, really, it's about 35 to 37 hours typically in those 3 days. We could do it for 4 days, but then you've got a 4th day of substitutes. You have, if you're asking a community member, sometimes there's local businessmen around here, and sometimes they're out of business and they're on this planning team. So what we tried to do is extend it to 3 days so that people didn't have to go to the 4th day. The other reason we do that is going into the evening, it doesn't give them a chance to go and call all of their constituents and find out how they're doing. We finish at 9:30 at night, 10 o'clock at night, most people go home and go to sleep, get up the next day and come back to this. But there's a third reason, folks, that high intensity you have there, it purges away pretense. It gets people to give up on the unimportant, but they will never compromise their convictions and the things that they feel strongly about. So it really forces them to cut to the chase and deal with what's important. You know, when you really boil it all down, they're not really agreeing on a lot of things, but the things they are agreeing to are very important things. The future direction of our school system. And then you look at the more specific details when you get back to that second session after you've had a chance for the action teams to design what specifically we do in each strategy. So it's 3 consecutive days. By the way, it could be a weekend day. That's usually up to the local school district. Sometimes it's Thursday, Friday, and a Saturday. I do not believe you should ever put it on a Saturday and a Sunday. One, for religious reasons for many people, but think about Monday after that. You know, you have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday, so you got a whole week. So it could be one weekend day, but oftentimes it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Sometimes it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Occasionally it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's up to the discretion of the local community to do that. By the way, this one's 2 days, but the first one's long. It goes into till 10 o'clock at night. The second one, usually you're done about 4 or 5 the next day. A lot depends on how many action plans come out. Yes?
I like a lot of what you're saying. I personally would feel really good if there were a small steering committee that were in charge of that.
The selecting?
I like that idea. One other thing, when you talk about goodwill, you've also talked about the necessity of having people who are seeing things a bit differently, including really all sides. And so when you talk about goodwill, I'm assuming that you don't mean that it has to be people who are only going to be positive
don't mean that. I mean that people are willing to subordinate, notice I said subordinate, not advocate, subordinate personal or narrow interest for the general interest. And what I'm really talking about is that people are willing to work together with others to get to agreement on what's best for the long-term interest of the whole school system. That's really what I mean by goodwill. I don't mean people that have, they're a bubbly personality, et cetera. In fact, there's all kinds of people that are on the planning team. In fact, when we're teaching people how to do this in their own district, we tell them you want some people that are pretty visionary or come up with great ideas, et cetera, but you also want some of those people that are very practical and can see some of the problems that change, and you want a balance of those sorts of people together and then hammer out what? An agreement. Hammer out an agreement. By the way, the types of locations I prefer are places that don't have windows for this session. Usually we like a clock, so people bring their watches with them anyway. But if you go in there without windows, you just start. You just keep working at it until you get to a certain place the first day, and that's usually at the strategic parameters, which are the rules we're going to operate by. And you got to get to the critical issues by the second day, and then you let them out, and then you've got a chance to finish without rushing on the third day.
I think one of the things that's in place right now, a recent committee that, and actually I think it's still in the process of being formed, is a community relations group to talk about open enrollment. And on the application, or whatever you want to call it, it talks about looking for people who want to be positive. And so I guess my concern is that we make sure that people aren't put off by that kind of work. Like my students don't want to be positive.
Well, let me tell you the 5 ground rules I always use for people at the first planning session. The first one, we want you to be honest, open, and candid. That's not always positive. Most people are honest. Sometimes they're not open or candid because they're afraid I might offend somebody or going to do that. But I tell them explicitly, we need to get your issues on the table here because the first way in resolving them is talking about them honestly, candidly. I also tell them sometimes people are reluctant to share an idea they have, a positive idea, very positive, for fear it won't be received well. And I tell them we've got to put it on the table. I tell them that on purpose. The second ground rule is I want them to keep the deliberations confidential in that group. I assure them we will publish everything we agree to. We'll go out with the police, we'll explain what we had, and what the mission is, the objectives, the strategies. We'll handle all the questions about why we put in there, but I never want them to personalize the discussion. Why? Because I know there's going to be emotional moments in there. I know there's likely to be hard feelings in every planning session I'm in. And what I don't want people to do is say, wow, we could have a really great plan if it wasn't only for that board member who's stuck in the 19th century. Because as soon as you personalize folks, you start to drive a wedge into your team. Third ground rule is the one I just talked about. We want all those people who are there, they have a particular point of view because of who they are, but we want them to subordinate their narrow personal interest for the long-term health of the whole school district. The fourth ground rule is how we make decisions. That's by consensus, not just input. So the superintendent board's going to do what they want after this feedback or input and not voting. That we have to get to agreement. And then the fifth one is I want them to work as peers. I want them to forget about rank and status while they're there. The students kind of smile at that, but we really do want them to say, usually we just use first names while we're there. But they can go back to rank and status when that session's over. Those are the 5 ground rules. I've done it 194 times in like 38 states, 11 countries. Those ground rules work well. But I don't want people just there to be positive. I want people there to be honest, open, and candid. Resolve these things. In fact, folks, I don't want to work with you if you're not willing to do this well. I really don't. I've got a really good reputation, and it's worked really well. And I've been blessed to do meaningful work in my career. And I don't want the last one to not feel right. I don't want it to work. Yes?
Are there topics that are not open to discussion?
I
is a polarized or elevated right now with regard to teacher wages and benefits. Is that something that is on the table for discussion?
Sure. It was part of the external analysis, because you didn't do it to yourselves. You see what I mean? It'd be, you know, there's 6 categories in the external analysis. Political is one of those. So is economic. What happened in Wisconsin as a result of the last election was both political and economic. So what we asked people to do is identify what's the event, and I think probably the issue with collective bargaining, and then we asked them, say, what's the trend or the assumption? The assumption right now is that collective bargaining was severely cut back and that teachers and administrators required to pay a portion of their health care and pension. I understand so far in this district, it doesn't include health care, but it does include pension. And then the third column, we say, what impact does that have on your school district and its ability to get to that? Now, that's definitely got to be talked about. I think it would be a waste of time not to talk about that. I really do. Regardless of what happens on the state level issues, local districts are going to have to decide, all right, that's there. Now, how do we continue to work towards achieving our mission, even though that's going on? Now, as to are there any subjects taboo, in the 20-plus years I've been working on this, I've had a couple of school districts that wanted some preconditions. In other words, they wanted to tell their planning team here, these are subjects we're not going to revisit. I always discourage that, but a couple times they wanted to write that. Both cases that I can remember, sir, it was about the passage of a referendum, and that they had said that during the referendum they had made a promise that they would not come back and seek more tax dollar support within a certain period of time. And both times that's what they wanted to put in there. But I recommend that you basically put that as part of the background information when the referendum was passed, under what circumstances it was passed, how many voted for it, how many voted against it, you know, that sort of thing. But I want that as value-free information, not value-laden. And then just deal with it. I'd rather there were not preconditions. All right? But the collective bargaining issue, it has to be done. You have to talk about it.
Because there are benefits there.
I understand that. By the way, what we talk about in the impact column, we ask them to search for both positive and negative impacts towards achieving what? The mission. I don't want to talk about its benefits for some citizens versus other citizens. I want to talk about how does it help us achieve our mission? How does it work against achieving the mission? We always ask that impact column is always on positive or negative towards achieving our mission. Yes? When do you have to talk about
We
that?
haven't set dates. I mean, we're talking about November, getting going. And I can assure everybody, we wouldn't even be doing this like this if we didn't want the opposite, opposing viewpoints, dissenting viewpoints. There'd be no sense in going through the entire process of hiring Howard and doing this if we didn't want some type of resolution. So, but in terms of answering your question, as soon as we've got something here, we need to get it out, because obviously not everyone is here tonight that has.
Right, that's what I was asking.
I think we know people that, and I know Mike Connie does, that have also signed up for his community connections, people that aren't here tonight. And Mike and I'll be sitting, looking down at that. Certainly, if you have suggestions, let myself or Mike know. But in terms of having people who aren't on necessarily the same page or haven't been agreeing, this would be ridiculous to be doing this, to even be going through the process if we didn't.
So you're thinking within the next 2 weeks?
Yes. And we, Howard and I have to look at dates.
By the way, if you find that you don't have enough time to turn this around to prepare well for a November date, you could still pull it off with an early December first planning session. I think if you push it into January, you're back to it's taking longer to get going. And I really would like, if you can pull it off, you can prepare well. That means get a good planning team together and put together the background information that team has to have about a week to 10 days before we start. They have to have that ahead of time. There's no time for silent read at that first planning session. If you can do that towards the end of November, then I think you could probably start your action planning before the winter holidays, and that would give you, you wouldn't be rushing on action planning and still be able to drive next year's budget. That's why this is coming up. And I have to tell you, the first thing I told Wendy when we had our first conversation, I said, Wendy, if you do this from the beginning, you gotta have some of your antagonists on this planning team. She said, I know. So, you know, again, steering committee makes good sense to me. Just make sure it's put together. By the way, I've already sent Wendy some of our training materials about how to do this, an internal coordinator's guide, which coaches people how to put together a good planning team that represents all the key stakeholder groups, et cetera. And although I'm just going to be here for your first and second planning session, I've already told Wendy if I work with them that she can contact me anytime for coaching all the way through this project. There is some pretty important stuff that has to be done locally inside during action plan. But we'll provide the materials for that to get it done. Any other questions, folks? Thank you for your attention and all the best.